Hi, guys, and welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show. We help Muslims and non Muslims to handle Islam in the 21st century. My name is Mustafa, and this is my co host in the nick of time. If you wish to talk about Islam, the ideology, you have come to the right place. We cover current Islamic news, Islamic scripture, some crazy comments, and a weekly topic about Islam to examine, critique, and analyze. If this is not enough Islam for you, please drop by our Discord to discuss any further questions about Islam. We condemn any form of discrimination, violence, misogyny, slavery. However, we do embrace free speech and criticism if it's factual and correct. Thank you for stopping by and enjoy the Gin and Tonic Show.
Good evening, everybody. I hope everybody can hear my voice for today. Welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show, and we have quite an interesting episode for today. But before I begin, big shout out to Nikhil because it's his birthday today. So happy birthday, Nikhil. That should have been on the title. So he is currently being serenaded in potentially either it's cake or dinner. So I'm very happy for him that he's being serenaded in birthday celebrations. So without further ado, also hello Smile. So yes, so happy birthday Nick, and yeah, let's proceed with today's. So today's topic is mainly concerning is France or Islamophobic. Well, again, I put the title Islamophobia on the title. If Islamophobia is even a real phenomenon, then we're going to actually discuss a few other things, such as the discrimination of Muslims, the hijab ban, and even the origins of the hijab itself. Nikhil, our Nick, gave me a few articles to overview, so which we'll be examining, and I also have a few hadiths that we can actually quickly go through, hadiths and Quranic verses in regards to the hijab, the free speech. I know I'm going to be all over the place with this. So let's see here. By the way, I posted the link if anybody wants to join live, so I can actually post the invite link again just in case. So I'll invite them, put the invite link again. And yeah, just so you can click on it and you can join the discussion. You're as far as you're welcome to either contribute to the discussion. You can actually even say your piece, insult me, that this is an open forum. All right. So coming off of the last week discussion with for this week's discussion, we're gonna, let me just share the screen. So there's an interesting article that I came across, which was what do you call it? It's in regards to Charlie Hebdo and Islamophobia. So it's in my email. All right. So this is, I hope you guys can see this. Let me just zoom it in a bit. Zoom it in. All right. So this is a Charlie Hebdo, Islamophobia and Freedoms of the Press by Brian Trench. And this is one of the articles that Nikhil recommended me that I review for today. Also, yes, hello Drastic and happy birthday, Nick. So this one's interesting because it kind of presents a very a more nuanced view. Hello, extremely cultured Ginny. How are you doing today?
Oh,
I
today
can't hear
I'm
you.
doing fine. And you?
Yeah, I'm actually like relatively speaking, okay. Um, but yeah, this is definitely. I'm glad that you joined me, so that it's just not me talking to myself and being alone over here. So thank you for giving me company.
Yes.
All right, so this is a very interesting article that Nikhil and I found. He sent it to me. So on Holocaust Memorial Day in 2013, The Sunday Times published a cartoon that depicted Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu building a wall containing human bodies. The cartoon was condemned as anti Semitic and was the subject of formal complaints by Jewish representative organizations and the Israeli government. The publisher, Rupert Murdoch, and the editor felt obliged to apologize to Jews for the offense caused. Kenan Malik, a writer and broadcaster on ethics and science, described the cartoon at the time vicious, grotesque, brutal, spiteful, and also offensive. Okay, for Charlie Hebdo, this is nothing new. This is very much the style of Charlie Hebdo, very
Yeah.
like in your face kind of the content that is. It's very in your face. It's going to be very almost like it can be disturbing, it can be like even offensive, and at times very harsh commentary on society. So but he insisted that this could not be construed as an attack on Jews but merely on Netanyahu's policies, as it is in the nature of political cartoons, Malik observed, to make malicious glee in skewering their subject through cruel exaggeration. And just a week earlier, Scarf depicted President Bashar al-Assad as a creature greedily drinking from a large cup labeled children's blood. Critics of Netanyahu cartoon were guilty of double standards, said Malik. Some of them considered Danish caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad to have been published legitimately, but not the Netanyahu cartoon. Those caricatures of Muhammad included one of him wearing a turban in the form of a bomb. These could more easily be read as an attack on Muslims as a group, which is, to an extent, true. This is read as an attack on Muslims as a group. Note here the reference to reading in the sense of interpreting, which opens up to alternative views. This is the critical element of the discussion on Charlie Hebdo. Fortunately, there. Yeah. So, Ginny, do you have any thoughts so far? Any feedback?
I've seen a lot of the Charlie Hebdo
Yeah.
cartoons, and I would say that certainly they aren't my cup of tea, but I just think that they should be allowed to post their cartoons.
Like, you feel that they shouldn't be allowed, or should
They
be?
should be. They
Okay,
should be.
yeah. Because I admit, back in 2015, being a believing Muslim back then, this was like 3 years roughly before I became ex-Muslim. I was actually, I admit it, I blamed Charlie Hebdo for being, what do you call it, calling it upon themselves when the attack happened. So, I've changed my mindset since then. And I actually was told by other people, like, you're actually justifying a terrorist attack, even though they just, drew a caricature. And also it's you're probably misinterpreting the caricature. And this was back when I was a Muslim. So yeah, it's again, it was not so much the Muhammad cartoon that I found offensive. It was more the Syrian child. There was a Syrian child dying and then growing up to be a groper, which was, it was a bit below the belt. It was very below the belt.
Yeah.
And I think that was what I felt like, okay, now you're just asking for it, So, but at the same time, it's wrong for me to
You
say
hear
that.
me?
Now I
Sorry.
hear you. Yeah, that's okay.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry, sometimes I don't see it activating on the screen when I speak, so I just wondered if. But
Yeah,
anyway,
no. Yeah, there was a
but
little like fumble in your speech. So it could just be the volume.
all right. But anyway, it does at least pick up now. But the thing with Charlie Hebdo that I think is that they are extremely, vicious in their caricatures, and some I would actually claim are downright racist. But I still think that
Mhm.
he should be able to post the things that they post
Yeah,
without any,
absolutely.
physical attacks or anything like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Even the, things that reference to the Holocaust.
Well, absolutely. And I think it's the very nature of the satire that is. Satire is it's a commentary on society, whether it's harsh, whether it's funny, if it's, it should exist. Oh yeah, so this part I found interesting: the contradictory responses or reactions to Charlie Hebdo and kosher supermarket of massacres of 7th January 2015 offered many examples of contradictions characterizing these debates. The massive demonstration of 11th January presented flagrant displays of double standards, being attended by representatives of government states and that have jailed journalists for exercising their freedoms. I remember this. There was this walk by the world leaders. Remember that? In support of Je suis Charlie Hebdo. I'm probably butchering that.
I think I remember that, yes.
Yeah, so there was this walk, and then there's world leaders coming to that walk, and then I think this is pointing to the hypocrisy of it, because the Saudi Arabian ambassador to France joined the rally as Saudi authorities were persecuting at that time Raif Badawi, a blogger. His they administered his first public lashing on the holy day, Friday, 9th of January, 2 days before the Solidarity March. Turkish Prime Minister was there too, as the Turkish state prosecuted journalists for supposed insults to the president. A student of LSE, I think London School of Economics, Daniel Wickham, deployed Twitter brilliantly to make a similar case against 20 other governments and state leaders at the rally. He included, I'm probably going to douse and Kenny for his government's role in recently formalizing the law on blasphemy, a key issue in the Charlie Hebdo affair. So, by contrast, Iceland's parliament voted to decriminalize blasphemy precisely in the name of a freedom of expression brought to attention in Paris. Okay, the philosopher Slavoj Zizek, I'm probably butchering these names, so I really apologize, observed that the political leaders on the Charlie Hebdo Solidarity March in Paris tended to portray the conflict as one between liberal democracy and religious fundamentalism. But the opposition between them is not so clear, said Zizek. On the other hand, the fundamentalists who are terrorists to display their lack of conviction through their violence. How fragile is the belief of a Muslim must be if he feels threatened by a stupid caricature in a weekly satirical newspaper? On the other hand, some defenders of democratic values denounce any critic of Islam as an expression of Western Islamophobia. This little Westernist. So yeah,
Let
I
me
kind
just
of like.
back up there about this idea that you are fragile because you take
Hmm.
to violence. I think it's actually wrong.
What would you say
Because
to
it's not
that?
about I mean, sure, there are certainly people that are fragile and resort to violence to defend their views. But the thing is that this, taking revenge on Charlie Hebdo for depicting the prophet or, doing blasphemy, it is kind of part of our religious duty.
Yes, and this is where a lot of people get confused. I do agree.
And I think it's so demeaning to just say, oh, you're just fragile. Oh,
Hmm.
you don't have any, agency. You are just reactionary. You only react.
Yeah, because it is, and one of the key issues is that it is a religious duty, and there are countless examples of, even in the Sira, for example, as well as like the Hadith, that someone insulted Muhammad, and Muhammad said, "Who will rid me of?" I think this was a poetess, Asma bint Marwan, and she was killed by someone, and then Muhammad pardoned him practically. So this was, and it set a precedent of this being a religious duty to defend the honor of the prophet, or like they call it of Rasulullah. What do you call the honor of Rasulullah? So it was more a religious duty. You are correct. So it's not so much of a fragile belief. It's just it is part of the belief itself.
And
So
we have gotten a couple of comments here.
oh yeah.
Smile. It is reactionary. Muslims pick and choose to disregard whole swaths of their religion when it suits them.
Absolutely.
Sure, they do, and there is, things that are disregarded and such, but that is always the case with almost any religion. But the fact is that there is still a strong tradition to this, and it has gotten emphasized in the latest time.
Is it you're talking of the tradition of like defending Muhammad's name? That is?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's because it's part and parcel of the religion itself too, which kind of begs the question, like, you know, can we really separate the two? Like, or does it get muddled? Do you feel it gets muddled if it's the reaction or and the religious duty?
I mean, it is both in a lot
Hmm.
of cases, but I still think it's so demeaning to just say, "Oh, you don't know what are doing, or you are so fragile that you just have to act on what others do, rather than being an actor doing stuff out of your own volition, out of your own you know environment, of your own habitus." I mean,
Yeah.
I always feel that this is the sort of demeaning view that certain people have about, non. I wouldn't call it exactly racist, but it's still, kind of looking at the other as being, passive and just, reactionary.
Like what you're saying is they're kind of painting the other as a savage. That's also the
Yes.
painting.
Not,
What is
not, not only as a savage, more like, oh, you can't you can't have any reason for this except your own weakness and fragility.
Mm. And this because this fragility was even displayed in India too, when I think Arman Navabi, when he made a caricature of Kali, and he actually labeled it, it's a very sexy goddess that you have. So it received this reaction from India, and especially like a lot of Hindu, even despite the fact that there are caricatures of gods and goddesses in temples having sex. So I think it was. I feel like that one was more reactionary, whereas with the Islamic faith, there's more to it has more to do with a duty. So I really like how you raised the issue here. It's more of a duty in the Islamic religion itself. And also, yes, hi Jen, thank you so much. I just saw this comment. Sorry, I just got distracted. um do you So I think let's yeah, so we were at Western Islamophobia. This is the last aspect of the international reaction, was very striking, and it came within days, if not hours, of the 7 January events. There were expressions of highly conditional support for Charlie Hebdo. So which I agree with, because it says the killings are terrible,
Oh,
but
but yeah.
yeah, this is where I saw this a lot. The killings are terrible, but, and the qualifications on solidarity sounded louder than the condemnation of the killings. And I remember this back in 2015. In this context, the claimed hysteria of the Je suis Charlie movement became the prime target of criticism. The ideology and organization of the assassins received much less attention. And this is what I remember: the assassins did not receive as much attention.
Yeah, because then you actually have to discuss, the other ideology, like discuss
Hmm.
about something foreign that you don't understand, and that is, that takes work and,
Yeah.
dedication, something that you don't want to do in, quick news, in the quick news cycle, and it takes time, it takes effort, and people
Yes.
are naturally too lazy to spend that effort on
And
actually
I've
understanding issues.
and
I'm not talking about the Muslim world that try to
mhm.
do it, but I'm talking generally when it comes from academia. I remember many, defending this, and I said, but do you have any, insight into Islamism or into, the various traditions of Islam, or, anything that, a history of the Middle East or the history behind, Islam and anything? And they said, no, but, you shouldn't just cause offense. And, but you offend always upon. And then I asked him, but you always say offensive things about Christians. Yes, but they're white. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it's it's very like, there's a term for it called like, inter I don't know what it's called, like there's a lot of overlapping issues that people don't understand. Like you said, they don't understand that it's part of the religious duty. Blasphemy itself, apostasy, blasphemy, these issues do come up. um that And insulting not only the prophet but also his companions as well. You can insult Allah. People can actually get away with insulting Allah.
Oh, you know, one thing that is family too that also shows that this sort of insulting the prophet, it is also very dependent upon context and how you do it.
Hmm.
Because there's a lot of hijab poetry that is cursing poetry that also includes some backhanded comments about Muhammad, and then
Hmm.
it's also applied to him, to the enemy. But and a lot of other things in poetry that includes even criticism of Muhammad's behavior in quite you know clearly insulting ways. And that was allowed during the medieval period because it was poetry. You're allowed to
Yeah.
do that there.
And poetry.
This also shows that this. But if you, for example, said that, oh, but I don't believe that Allah is actually physically sitting on a throne, then they would kill you.
Oh wow. Oh wow.
Yeah, yeah. You have to realize that what is considered the biggest issue in a religion can shift.
Oh wow. So it's like it's a very like weird shifting uh I don't know. There's something that constantly shifts. I don't know what can I
So if
compare
you
it
began
to.
to insult also the implied God had a form and was sitting physically upon the
Hmm.
throne, or gave God negative attributes, then it was a big issue.
Interesting, because what I found interesting is that there are paintings of Muhammad and Ali that
Uh,
was from Dante's Inferno. Actually, let me show you
Can
from.
I just answer drastic measures?
Yes, yes, you may.
Yeah, he made a comment here that you can't mock Muhammad with poetry, and unless you want
Ginny,
today, I was talking about certain periods during the medieval age when
oh
you
yeah.
actually could do this. But then during that period, if you, for example, implied that God had, physical hands, for example, or you imply that God had certain attributes, which are even, you could argue that you could actually interpret existing in the Quran, then you would become in a real issue.
Yeah, but however, Ginny, what I think drastic means is that in the Sirah, for example, in the Sirah, which is written in the 7th, 8th
Yeah,
century,
yeah, yeah.
it's the opposite. It's the opposite, because Muhammad, when he heard the poetry, or how the writers interpret,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
so
But
they
we
couldn't get
should
away with the
remember that
poetry.
I'm talking more about the
The
10th
later
century.
middle. Okay, so you're talking
No,
more
not
later Middle Ages.
later. I think this begins. It begins in the ninth, eighth, probably eighth, but goes for eighth, ninth to 10th century. I
Okay.
have to, think.
Okay, yeah, because 7th, 8th centuries were a bit different, were very different, vastly different. You couldn't even
Yeah,
get away
yeah.
with poetry, based on the Sirah
But it
itself.
wasn't a very tolerant time either. You
Hmm.
know, if you did, the thing is, more of my point was less that it was more tolerant back then, and more that what is considered blasphemy or a large issue in Islam has changed a lot for the time. Today
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can curse Allah, a god, but you
Hmm.
can't curse Muhammad.
Yeah, because it's funny too because there's a movie called Bruce Almighty that's literally like showing God in a form. That is literally, it's the Abrahamic God in a form. No one found offense to that.
If you had
Absolutely.
done that during the early medieval,
Yeah,
Islamic times, then you would have been killed.
exactly. So in today's the Muslim world, no reaction whatsoever. But then there was a very badly made movie. It was called, I think, The Plight of Muslims or something like that. It was on YouTube, and this garnered like almost like YouTube got banned in Pakistan and Muslim countries like Indonesia. I believe in what do you call it, Iran as well. It was like this widespread ban on YouTube itself, just because that movie existed and it was a horribly made movie. I looked at it again. I'm like, the movie is horrible, very low budget, and that was offensive. And I actually managed a way, even as a Muslim, when I looked at the movie, I actually weirdly didn't find it offensive. I kind of found it as they're not necessarily wrong because this did happen. So, yeah, and like Drastic says, Muhammad, from modern times, it seems that Muhammad does seem more important compared to Allah. And yeah, it is quite
Yeah,
noticeable.
yeah, it is much
Yeah.
more important when it comes to blasphemy. I agree there.
Because
But
I think,
that was just saying that the blasphemy against the prophet is considered much more worse today than it was in the past. In the past, it
mhm.
was blasphemy against God that was considered more important.
Which I find very interesting because there was a time where you, even in Sunni circles, in Sunni Islam, it was very commonplace to insult Ali as well or make fun of Ali, for example. And this was, and a lot of Shia writers kind of, I maybe the Shia historians might be exaggerating, but I wouldn't necessarily find it hard to believe that that happened, like making
Have
fun of
you seen
Ali or
all
the
of
Imam.
these cartoons that depict, the events, these Arabic Shia cartoons that depict, the events happening from the Shia perspective and being, how offensive,
Do you
really,
have
really
those?
offensive against
Do you
Sunnis.
have those? Do you
I
have
don't have the
those?
links right now to
Oh
it.
man, I would love to have shared those. Those were, those would have been a gold mine. But there was something Muhammad and Ali. Yeah, so there was something in Dante's Inferno. There's a blasphemous depiction of Muhammad and Ali.
Yeah, because they're
Um,
seen as false Christians.
yeah, yeah, yeah. One second, let me just stop sharing on one end, and let me just present another link. Share screen. So this is called the blasphemous depiction of and in the like in the Dante's Inferno, the Divine Comedy, and I think he's shown as like the sowers of discord, and he's mutilated by an angel. So Muhammad shows his entrails to Dante and Virgil. And while on the left, and Ali is presented as a son, which was a misunderstanding because it was
Yeah,
son-in-law.
yeah.
So yeah, so this is Muhammad like kind of opened up. Is it on the left? Where? So whose punishment is to be mutilated to Dante, and while on the left stand his head cleft from the chin forelock. Yeah, chin forelock. Which one's Ali? And then there's a demon too, like that's um chasing them. So there was so yeah, this is an old depiction of Muhammad. This is Muhammad right here. So and this is Dante and Virgil. So this was I'm surprised that a lot of people aren't aware that this depiction
I
actually
don't know
exists.
when that depiction was added because, you know, La Divina Commedia was, written in the late Middle Ages by
Hmm.
Dante Alighieri,
It could
and
be. Yeah.
it could be without pictures. So that picture could have been added later, but they do have a depiction of Muhammad because I remember it when they describe him as the false prophet, the false Christian
Yeah,
heretic.
and the way they present Muhammad as more of a sower of discord, so it's an interesting depiction because they saw him as a form of a Christian, but
Yes.
different. a very misguided version of a Christian, which was
You
an
have to
interesting
remember
view.
that the view of Christians towards other Christians in, for example, the Roman Catholics, since, Dante was that they were, the worst kinds of persons on earth.
Oh, interesting. So other
Y-
Christians.
Yes, because they aren't just unbelievers. They are unbelievers that twist the truth.
So it's kind of like the hypocrites in the Muslim faith, that is the Islamic faith, the hypocrites concept.
Yeah, kind of.
Hmm.
But it's, if if you can see this also throughout, since this has also to do with, religions generally, almost turning generally against more. They tend to be that religions almost find sects that are close to themselves but slightly different more threatening than religions that are, radically different from them, because they
Yeah,
kind of compete in the same niche. And
yeah,
Christianity has not, throughout much of its history, been, particularly tolerant towards other types of Christianity.
yeah, which I found very interesting, and especially even among Muslim sects too, like the Shia,
Yeah,
Sunni, as well as like Shia with other sects, as well as Sunni Islam with other, you know, like.
or Shia against Shia sects, or Sunni sects
Hmm.
against other Shia Sunni sects. I mean,
Hmm.
the fact that, the Safavids are, cursed in Zaydi literature because how
Yeah,
brutal they were against the Zaydi Shia
yeah,
and the
and
Ismailis.
the Ismailis, absolutely, they were practically persecuted. The Ismaili and Zaydi Shia Muslims, and this was
It's
just
kind of
one.
funny that the Houthis, who are, in Yemen, are Zaydis, that they are kind of allied with, Iran due to, just political reasons. But,
Yeah.
traditionally, they hated, the Safavids, which are the ones that spread Twelver Islam.
Yeah, and not only that, the Safavids are the reason why we have the mullah clergy, that is the aristocracy that rules to this day. Why the mullahs are so powerful? It's the
Yeah,
Safavids set the stones and the
yeah,
seeds
yeah, and
for
they,
that.
they hated each other in back in the day.
Hmm.
And, this also then you also have the, these very complex alliances historically, where you have, cross religious alliances against the so-called religious brothers, both in Europe and in the Middle East.
Yeah, and there were some weird alliances between the Ottomans and the Austrians, or sometimes with you know, the
Yeah,
Habsburg with the Safavids. It was a weird alliance between the Safavids and
or
Habsburgs.
in, with the various sultanates in Yemen and Ethiopia against the
Oh yeah.
Somali Adal Sultanate.
Oh boy. It's so weird. It was so weird. It gets weird.
Real politics beats religion most of
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah, and if anything, it just gets very super muddles the situation. But yeah, back to the article here. I just wanted to finish this up. The stance was widely expressed in social media, like the stance of like, the assassins receiving much less attention, and in the news media commentaries, notably from sources that might be on other issues be aligned with secularism and freedom of expression. It was based on Charlie Hebdo's perceived hostility to Muslims, who are in France a large but marginalized and vulnerable minority. Charlie Hebdo was condemned as an Islamophobic publication. In some places, this was restated as an accusation against Charlie Hebdo as racist. Implicitly, at least, it was being claimed that Charlie Hebdo brought the murderous attack upon on itself. And I honestly was one of those. I used to be one of the. I do admit, I used to be one of those people who used to think this way. Um, an Irish contributor to Charlie Hebdo, Robert McLean Wilson, identified an article in the New Yorker as an early source of his piffle. The charge of racism against a Charlie Hebdo cartoon, as he wrote, an ignorant and repellent slander of the blamelessly dead. Wilson pointed out that the supposed victim of the cartoon's racism spoke eloquently and movingly, at the funeral of a Charlie cartoonist. So it was worth pondering at how such insinuations of self-imposed dangers would have been seen in Ireland if they were in response to the murders of Veronica Guerin and Martin O'Hagan, journalists who were killed by people who resented investigation of their criminal affairs. Within France, there were those like Dominique Vidal of Les Demons, I'm probably butchering this, who declined to join the chorus of Je suis
I can't
Charlie.
speak French either, so it's no
Yeah.
issue.
So it's interesting. They declined to join the chorus in opposition to the magazine's editorial line and its tendency to shock for shocking's sake. But few observers in Ireland or elsewhere in the English-speaking world would have had the knowledge on which to base such a judgment. If we knew anything about Charlie Hebdo, it was probably just one thing. This magazine had published cartoons of Prophet Muhammad. Indeed, after the January events, the magazine's international critics plucked out and circulated individual cartoons to support the criticism of Charlie Hebdo's bad taste or worse. And to read, Charlie Hebdo's text is not easy. Like you and I said, it's not everybody's cup of tea. Unless one is well immersed in French colloquialisms and in country's public and everyday culture. Despite speaking and reading French for 50 years, I struggle to understand much of the writing in Charlie Hebdo in detail. To read the magazine's cartoons is doubly difficult. Criticism of the magazine from the English language commentators tended not to acknowledge such issues. Some
This is true. I can see this as a large
Mhm.
issue.
Yeah, as because they don't necessarily understand how the French culture itself and the nuances. Some ridiculed the notion that there were problems of interpretation, suggesting that those who highlighted such problems were requiring high-level qualifications in hermeneutics to be a credible commentator. What is hermeneutics?
Hermeneutics is the things to there is a it's a series of the theories about how you interpret things with context,
Yeah.
and how you get meaning through context and statements in a context or actions or anything in a context.
So
For example, the there is something called the hermeneutic cycle on how you go through various things in order to find various connections between various things in a context.
yeah, which is interesting. So this is definitely what do you call it? It's a new word. Thank you so much for telling me this. But yeah, this is so basically it's context, right? This sort of studying context of the particular.
Contextual understanding and
Mhm.
meaning creation in contexts. Yes.
Okay, okay, all right. So let's move on to yeah. Okay, so protagonists in the debate made big claims on RTE Radio One's Marianne. I am butchering this Finucane show on the big day of the big march in Paris. A journalist stated that the magazine had given offense to 1.5 billion Muslims, inviting the question what would the reaction be if someone said any mockery of the Pope, for example, offended 1.5 billion Catholics? I mean, the Pope doesn't, it's not exactly a fair comparison of Muhammad and the Pope, is
No.
it? I would say a closer comparison would be Jesus, no?
I mean, yeah, but even then, Jesus is God personified. I mean, the thing
Yeah,
is that you can't do these, blunt comparisons that people love to do.
yeah, it's such a weird
It's something I hate with most of modern debate culture and discourse. We have become too blunt generally. We use
yeah.
these, large terms that represent everything, and thus they represent nothing.
Well, and keep in mind that I feel like it's also false equivalence too, right?
Yeah,
Like it's
yeah,
a false
that's
equal.
what I meant by,
Yeah.
the blunt terms,
Uh-huh.
including too much. Because everything becomes equalized when it should not be, and you need to have a rather high level of definition in certain discussions. And I think that we have lost that. We have been too, used to extreme reductionism.
Yeah, because the Pope and Muhammad don't really compare at all.
No.
And while some commentaries on the January events underlined the an iconic character of Islam, and thus the offense caused by any visual depictions of the Prophet. Left wing writer Tariq Ali, himself a Muslim background, wrote that there were various views within Islam on religious imagery, albeit a strong cultural norm against images. However, Ali argued the focus on religion was mistaken and asked parenthetically, why was Catholicism never blamed for the IRA offensive? What was the IRA offensive?
The Irish Republican Army
Okay,
during
okay,
the,
okay.
the if it has to do with the conflicts on between Ireland and England. I'm not.
Yeah, okay. Your voice cut out a bit. Ginny, can you hear me? Okay, there we go.
But I mean, the IRA was, claimed itself to be a Catholic organization, but it had more to do with Irish nationalism generally,
Hmm.
identifying itself as Catholic against
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Protestant
yeah.
Anglo-Saxons, and
Yeah,
this is far more. I mean, religion had a part in this, but it was more like, oh, we just take the religious imagery. It was more
yeah,
secondary to the nationalist
yeah.
aspirations.
Because he says,
But I mean, a lot of religious conflicts are like that,
yeah.
admittedly.
Because the writer Brian Trench here says, to which one would rather obvious answer is that the IRA gunmen and bombers did not tend to shout praise to Mary or the Lord as they carried out their attacks, or to carry out suicide bombings on the basis of promised pleasures in the afterlife.
No, they did. This one I actually know. I have a distinct memory that they actually did praise Mary,
Really?
and they used the symbolism of her as a contrast to
Interesting.
not really in an attack, but generally they would end statements with praise to the Virgin Mary.
Interesting.
May
So,
she defend our country against
yeah, because I feel like it, even though it had nationalism, like, nationalistic approach, it's starting to sound a little more religious when you kind of
Yeah,
put
but the thing is, it was mainly a nationalist thing
it.
against the English. But since there was this distinction between Northern and Southern Ireland, between Protestants and Catholics in the south, then it became highly religious.
Yeah,
It's
and
kind of like how I mean, I would say that there are exist conflicts which are very religious, purely religious. But then there also exist these conflicts where religion is more brought in as a secondary thing
yeah, which
to just get further support and things. I think that a lot of the things that we often speak about the Taliban
your voice cut out there a bit.
as
Oh,
this
Taliban,
purely
yes.
Islamic movement.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the
yeah.
more the Taliban in Afghanistan. But the more I've read about them, the more it feels that they are just Pashtun tribalists
Well, keep in mind with
using Islam
keep in mind
as a cover
the
because they yeah,
Taliban, there's two different Talibans now, right? There's the Tehrik-e-Taliban of
yeah.
Afghanistan, and now there's the Tehrik-e-Taliban of Pakistan. So it does have the religion as its primary motive, but definitely I would say Afghan Taliban.
I mean, the fact that they haven't, allowed other Sunni Muslims from other ethnicities into their movement
Mhm.
and have been almost a purely Pashtun movement should, point towards where their true allegiance lies.
Yeah, but keep in mind, there's a lot of Pakistanis as well. A lot of Pakistanis that are part of the Taliban as well, too, right? So it,
I am not that good at this, but this is just what
yeah,
I've
yeah,
seen or
yeah, yeah.
what I've gotten the
But
impression of from the outside.
yeah, well, keep in mind when I was living in Pakistan, right? So there's a different, but it has split into two different factions, like the Tehrik-e-Taliban of Pakistan and the Taliban of Afghanistan. That is, and some people in Pakistan see the Afghanistan ones as distinct and as good guys, even though realistically speaking, that's not the case at all. and they see the Pakistani Taliban as bad guys, but it just gets, it's more, definitely Hanafi Muslim, the predominant,
Yeah, yeah.
but
I'm not
there,
saying that they aren't extremely religious. What I'm saying more is that if you look at that, if the primary goal was, Islamic supremacy, then they would have, allowed other, tribal members from other groups, with which there are a lot of in Afghanistan, to join in and get up in the ranks if they were just, hardcore believers.
so
But they don't generally.
because there's more, and there is this, it is an interesting issue because it is very Pashtun dominant.
Yeah, I said that it was more or less
Racial,
a Pashtun nationalist
yeah.
movement, but using religion, Islam as a cover almost.
But keep in mind, there's a lot of people from Punjab and Karachi as well who are not Pashtuns,
Yeah,
are
but
part
they
of
never
the.
but they never get up in the ranks.
Interesting, which is an
It
interesting
was someone
observation.
that said that anything above a certain rank, you had to be a Pashtun, and it wasn't even
Interesting.
if it wasn't even family just because of the clan structures, because close clans and such. No, it was just that's the rule generally.
Interesting. So which kind of begs, which kind of makes, um I'm gonna sound like very weird. ISIS or Daesh being now sounds more inclusive.
Yeah,
It's
but
so weird.
yeah, but that's probably due to the fact that I think that Daesh or ISIS do have more of a actually true religious focus.
Mhm. Yeah, because it's more the Iraq, people from Iraq, people from Syria, and people from Jordan, uh, like or and certain Arab regions were part of this, and even Pakistanis as well too.
Here we have a comment from Drastic Measures. Religion was only ever superficially involved in the Northern Ireland conflict. Yes, I agree. It was mainly,
Yeah,
nationalist sentiments, but they did spice it up a lot with religion.
yeah, because when you say that, when they shout at Hail Mary, that's a bit surprising for me, very surprising. Like, I have never heard someone shout Hail Mary and then the bomb goes out. This is a first, a big first. I'm so used to the Allahu Akbar chant before an explosion or an attack. Um, but yeah, this is definitely, it gets very interesting in this. Um, so back to the article, Islamophobia. A seminar in Maynooth University in April, after Charlie Hebdo, included many reflections on the responses to and interpretations of the January events across international media, including social media. The starting point and end point for many contributors was a critique of the Je suis Charlie movement, of the French form of secularism, of liberal media, and of Islamophobia. Very much less attention was paid to Islamist ideologies. Fintan O'Toole in the Irish Times had highlighted Saudi influence in the Islamic world, drawing attention to the Wahhabist version of Islam propagated by Saudis. But Islam was elsewhere widely represented as singular and needing to be defended against offense. This generalized view of Islam underpinned generalized accusations of Islamophobia, a charge so wide that it's almost impossible to answer, linking left-wing secularists with right-wing anti-immigrant xenophobes, putting adherents of other faiths or non-believers who interrogate Islam in the same category as evangelical zealots who denounce Islam as satanic. And this is something I very agree with. It's a very Islamophobia itself. The accusation is so generalized that it links so many people, critics, those who want to ask questions, with the same people as racists and anti-immigrants, as well as evangelicals. It puts so many people into the same category, when in reality it's it's so much more complicated than that. And you know what do you call it, we need to be able to inquire about Islam. And also they brought this Wahhabist version of Islam. Okay, Wahhabism, I find, is a huge scapegoat. It's just a scapegoat, nothing else. Because there are problems not just with the Wahhabist ideology, but then there's problems with even Shia ideology as well. There's problems with the Hanafi, the Hanbali, the Shafi, the Maliki, different
I
fiqhs.
mean, I mean, Deobandi Islam is just a type of, you know, Hanafi Maturidi
Yes,
Islam
yes,
that is
Deobandi
pretty
Islam.
radical.
And Deobandi Islam is seen as pretty radical. Many even have found problems in Barelvi interpretation of Islam too. So, if anything, this it gets so Wahhabism I've seen and Salafism are thrown around terms which are more scapegoats. I
Yeah,
find these
yeah. I
as
mean,
scapegoats.
it's also very easy to say, oh, all of these, Islamists are the same, but they are actually rather different when you actually begin to, scratch the surface on
Absolutely,
them. I mean, a Dahiri Islamist isn't going to act the same as a Deobandi Islamist.
absolutely. And with Dahiri, for example, the we were discussing this. They prefer ancient weapons, and
Yeah.
they still believe in
I mean,
duels.
most of them aren't that violent because it would be, kind of hard to be violent following the creed. Of course, you had the Norwegian, terrorist, but he's kind of an outlier.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, if anything, the Dahiri sounds very like, very much like an Amish of the
They
Muslim
are,
world, very
they
much the
are.
Amish. And then if you see someone like the Maliki, would have very different reaction, or very a Maliki Islamist would be very different, absolutely very
Yeah.
different. So,
The thing is that Dahiri Islam did later actually influence a lot of the Maliki scholars in
mhm,
the Maghrib region, due to various political and historical reasons. Because Dahiri Islam was also very strong there alongside Maliki, so they began to influence there. Because the Maliki school has this idea about urf, or local regionalism,
yeah,
taking
yeah, yeah.
up local customs and integrating them. And when one of the local customs becomes, something pre-Islamic but pre-Maliki there, then they also integrated it into it.
Which is so weird. It is so weird. Um,
But they
we,
did kind of set it as the second degree, despite it being an Islamic idea. It's
mhm,
the more I'm reading into this, the more this is actually pretty fascinating.
yeah, like on
Because
its
I'm
own.
reading it in connection to awqaf and land rights
Yeah,
usage.
yeah,
So
yeah.
so it's not something we usually discuss here when it comes to regards to Islam, but it's still very interesting.
Yeah, it's very fascinating, actually. Very, very fascinating. Let's continue with the article. I know we
Yeah,
diverge a bit because there's so
yeah,
many
yeah.
connecting layers into the issues. Charlie Hebdo editor Sebastian Charbonnier, I am very butchering this again, was well aware of the criticism of his magazine as Islamophobic, and he sought to answer it in an essay he completed shortly before his death. In an earlier set of mini essays under the title Little Tolerance Treaties. I am not going to say this in French. Yeah, I'm not going to say this. All right. He had declared death to da, 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 50 verse 50 very diverse phenomena of contemporary life. The closest he came to referring to Islam or to Muslims was declaring death to Bashar al-Assad's mustache, which he advocated should be handed over to an international tribunal to judge him for bringing ridicule on the image of dictators. This is very funny, actually. This is actually very funny. Bashar al-Assad death to Bashar al-Assad's mustache. By the way, Jinni, your voice is cutting out.
Sorry, I forgot to mute.
That's okay. No, your voice is cutting out. But yeah, other items on his death list included theoreticians of laughter, shoes that hurt. Okay, I agree. Shoes that hurt should be on the death list. Readers of free sheets, 30 somethings. Hey, bald, bald people with hair pieces, supermarket shoppers. Oh man. So he was not as obsessed with Muhammad and Islam as the crude critic might suggest. Sharp's treatise is deliberately provocative in echoing the title of Voltaire's treatise on tolerance, but Sharps and his colleagues death triggered a renewed interest in France and in the legacy of Voltaire and other Enlightened figures. A new collection of 18th century texts on tolerance became a bestseller in France in mid 2015. It was published in English translations by a group of Oxford academics and students on the anniversary of Charlie Hebdo assassinations as Tolerance, the Beacon of Enlightenment. In his posthumously published essay, Sharp suggested that those who highlighted Islamophobia rather than racism make Islam the victim of racist or fascist attacks rather than the individual citizen, the African, or the woman who was attacked. Sharp asked, "Who are the Islamophobes? Those who claim that the Muslims are stupid enough to get excited at the sight of a grotesque drawing?" Phobia refers to fear, not hate, he pointed out, which I agree with. Phobia is more of a fear. It might be more aptly applied to those who advocate not publishing anything that might cause offense to Muslims. The Charlie Hebdo caricatures are not directed to all Muslims, he insisted. By virtue of what twisted theory would humor be less compatible with Islam than in any other religion? If we let it be understood that we can laugh at anything, except certain aspects of Islam because Muslims are much more sensitive than the rest of the population, what are we doing if not practicing discrimination? So, which is an interesting, which kind of muddles the situation. Now, he recalled that Charlie Hebdo published pictures of Muhammad for years without much response until the Danish cartoons appeared. Then, particular interpretations were given of those and related cartoons. Sharp observed that the famous picture of Muhammad with a turban as a bomb has been seen as mostly as suggesting that all the faithful are terrorists. Another possible interpretation, he proposed, is that it is saying, look what the terrorists are making of Islam. Look how the terrorists who claim the Prophet see him. A similar ambiguity can be found in the cover of a cartoon of the post-massacre of edition of Charlie Hebdo, apparently depicting the Prophet with the caption, "All is forgiven, but all is forgiven, but just who is forgiving whom for what?" Now, to be fair, I don't necessarily agree with the second interpretation because the turban with the bomb on it is definitely saying, yeah, Muhammad is a terrorist. Like that's pretty
Yeah.
much the obvious interpretation.
I
Like,
agree with you on
yeah,
that.
it's like now you're just kind of also, making yourself out to be. I wouldn't say he's not necessarily gaslighting, but
There's
he's
one
just
thing
like,
being a devil's advocate, and there's another thing to, just be ridiculous.
yeah, because now that's just ridiculous. Now that because like the painting itself is like, yeah, it's obvious. It's now that's just too obvious. Now you're just kind of like trying to be manipulative. So, um, oh, by the way, yes, to even if any more Muslims end up watching this, see how nice we are to you guys. So yeah, we're trying to be as secular as possible. Blasphemy in a secular society. One needs to be a believer to recognize blasphemy, Sharp observed, but the topic was taken various ways by other French commentators as a debate developed that quickly turned verbally violent. Historian Alain, I will not pronounce that name, noted that the concept of blasphemy was all but forgotten in a largely secularized society and was taken back on the agenda, pushed by fundamentalists, Christians, and Muslims alike. In the Rush Public book, In Praise of Blasphemy, polemicist Caroline Forrest, a former contributor to Charlie Hebdo, defended the right to blaspheme as a candle which guides free spirits threatened by fanatics. Well, it's something I agree with. Sociologist Emmanuel Todd criticized Charlie Hebdo for associating French identity with the right to blaspheme against Muhammad or to spit on the religion of the weak. In a book, which I also kind of agree with too, like it's kind of painted France in this, in this weird light too, like so it became part of French identity. In a book written quickly after January events, Todd criticized the Je suis Charlie response to those events. He was condemned, just as Charlie Hebdo had been, for engaging in gratuitous controversy. He became the target of vehement attacks, but also a preferred reference for international observers who deplored kind of hysteria that gripped France after the events of the 7th January. In the English-speaking world, there was also vehement and vitriolic debate, perhaps most surprisingly among literary writers, when Penn decided to honor Charlie Hebdo in its annual gala in May 2015. Australian novelist Peter Carey was among those who protested, citing inter alia, the cultural arrogance of the French nation. Salman Rushdie, who has been subject of the fatwa from Iran's Islamic authorities, kept up the verbal heat, saying Carey and colleagues had made themselves fellow travelers of fanatical Islam, which seeks to terrify us all. What is an interesting observation from Salman Rushdie? Okay, yeah, so he's against Peter Carey basically because he's labeling him as a fellow traveler of fanatical Islam, which is an interesting what do you call it way to describe people like Peter Carey. Sudanese writer born Nisreen Malik, Guardian, commended Penn for making the award, writing it as it is possible to both abhor Charlie Hebdo's cartoons and at the same time recognize that risking being murdered for them might be worthy of recognition by a freedom of expression organization. Subsequently, however, her tolerance of Charlie Hebdo's intolerance broke when she judged that the magazine, with its editorial implying that the problem is not with some Muslims but with all Muslims, had finally confirmed itself as racist. I wouldn't say it's racist necessarily because
That's
Muslims aren't a
that's debatable, but I still defend the right to be racist
yeah, and keep in mind,
in
Muslims aren't
speech.
necessarily a race. Like Muslims aren't a race because
Yeah, I agreed
person
with
from
that too. But
any
you know,
yeah
there are other depictions and there are other things generally would paint them in that direction.
uh-huh
And I still
exactly.
think that, but I still think that they should be able to publish their
Oh yeah,
cartoons. They should have the right to express themselves, even if it's, you know, for me, extremely stupid. But, you know,
they should have the right to express themselves and without getting murdered. That is, without getting
yes.
murdered. Um, yeah, and it said here the notion that all Muslims bore some responsibility for Islamist terror, however, also implicit in Abdunar Badar's open letter to the Muslim world, in which the writer and philosopher addressed fellow Muslims directly about Islamic state. What in fact are you saying in the face of this monster? You are shouting, "It's not me, it's not Islam." You're denying that the crimes of this monster are committed in your name. But all of these proclamations of innocence and difference are not enough. Far from it, because you are taking revenge in reactionary self defense without taking, above all, the responsibility of self criticism, which I found interesting from this writer, Abdinar Bidar, um, which I find very surprising. It's more of a self reflection. Um, So Bid'ah refers to Wahhabism and Salafism spreading from your holy places in Saudi Arabia like cancer, which comes from your very heart itself. But he also insisted that there were countervailing tendencies. There are in the Muslim countries and everywhere in the Muslim communities worldwide strong and free consciousness, but they are condemned to live their freedom without the recognition of their true rights at their own risk and peril, faced with the community controls or even at the times faced by the religious police. Um, One example of this, I feel like they should have also mentioned Pakistan and I feel like Iran and Qatar's blasphemy laws. That is, the blasphemy laws, like even legally speaking, free thinking Muslims or free thinking ex Muslims cannot express themselves because of even the legal, just out of fear of getting prosecuted by the state itself. And on top of that, you also have vigilante mobs too. So yeah, this could have been more stronger as a message. In the wake of November events in Paris, when Islamic State militants killed 130 people in coordinated attacks on a rock concert venue on other sites, Algerian writer Kamal Daoud also identified Saudi Arabia as a noxious influence. Daoud is the subject of a fatwa issued by a Salafist group. He lamented the failure of the West to recognize Saudi Arabia's role and the failure of the Arab world to come to terms with three major issues: freedom, death, and women. Where I kind of agree with Kamal Daoud on this one. and Saudi Arabia definitely plays a part. But then there's also the religion itself. I think sometimes I feel like Saudi Arabia also becomes a scapegoat too. I feel like it because
Yes, I
it's
mean,
also another form of a scapegoat.
it's also people also don't realize that I realized, after having studied, is how much Saudi Arabia is just one example, but how many of the Arab states aren't actually modern states as we would think about them, considering that there are entire territories that are controlled or doesn't even pay tax,
And
except
yeah,
sporadically to the central government.
yeah, and
So,
even
it's more of like a patchwork of various systems.
yeah, and in the Arab world, I even if you look at Iraq, for example, the Kurdish region is extremely different from the Shia Arab regions and the Sunni Arab
Yeah.
regions.
Yes.
So it gets more. So that's one example that it's not exactly even a proper state that's running. Um, yeah, so this is and the issues of freedom, death, and women. Yeah. So now this they covered the topic of taking offense. Journalism professor Brian Winston begins his explanation of giving and taking offense by referring to Ayatollah Khomeini's fatwa against Salman Rushdie. In A Right to Offend, he goes on to discuss the growing power of people who believe they have been harmed, who they say they are taking offense, a state which cannot be confirmed by others, as he puts it, and who attempt to shut down or punish the expression they believed has caused harm. In exposing Kant, hypocrisy and abuse of power, journalism and satire unavoidably cause offense to some. In the discussion of freedom of expression, there have been frequent references to the right to offend, but also to the need to exercise this right responsibly. Reflecting on the murders of fellow cartoonist at Charlie Hebdo, Tommy Ungerer acknowledged that the difficulty of dealing with the state of taking offense. His own work over the many decades has been rude and crude and displayed an abiding fascination with women's thighs and buttocks. His caricatures of France and Germany as Marianne and Germania are wicked and withering. An Ungerer image of about free speech was quickly adopted in the Je suis Charlie movement, and an exhibition of solidarity with Charlie Hebdo was presented in the Ungerer Museum within days of the atrocity. He has had a home in Ireland since 1970s and was interviewed by in May 20. He strongly condemned the Charlie Hebdo killings, but added, "To make fun of Muhammad, that's not satire, that's gratuitous. Satire can be close-minded. There's a limit. I'm very split here. One has to think of the consequences. People's religions is something that gives them hope." Now, now keep in mind, this could just be his belief too. This could just be his personal belief. Because I find it a satire because Muhammad and Islam themselves are an extension. They are political tools as well. They are a means of they should be subject to satire. Um, you know, and it's I wouldn't necessarily say it's closed-minded. So I disagree with him. But can it be that the religious or personal philosophical beliefs of individuals or groups are beyond parameters of the allowable, criticized, or ridiculed? Can it be those who take offense get to define the parameters of legitimate, allowable, critique, or ridicule? And which is a good question to ask because a lot of people, a lot of individuals I've come across, it's like, oh, what you're saying about the Quran is like it's not because when I identify the problems with the Quran and the Hadith, it's like, oh, you're not doing a proper analysis. You should be doing it with good intentions and not point out the problems. So basically, those who take offense get like they somehow decide what's what do you call it like what's a critical analysis and what's not. So and to be fair, I find that sometimes we have to be blunt. We have to be blunt with our criticism and very straightforward with the criticism. It does force people to think. And I think someone gave me this example of when uh, I think it was Dawkins or Sam Harris who said something about like a man flying on a flying donkey. The very statement itself is like very provocative because it's a slap on your face, because it's like it's a man on a flying donkey, like how it's described, but it forces you to think. So yeah, now how long is it? Oh yeah, I'm almost done with this. All right, so Charlie Hebdo continues to be polemic, provocative, playful, puzzling, and perverse. In its edition of the 3rd June, Pope Francis was identified this old fella, nearly 80, in a piece commending his ecologically minded views. There was supportive coverage, too, of an Iranian cartoonist who escaped the regime in his own country only to find himself entangled in the bureaucracy of French asylum processes. The edition of 2nd December 2015 contained a long interview with the makers of a TV documentary series tracing the links between Christianity and Islam, containing the evidence of the magazine's fascination with religion. The magazine is in a stronger position than it has ever been after decades of very limited circulation, dozens of lawsuits, geez, and murders of so many of its editorial team. So the magazine has a history of, being very provocative. It is a credit to democratic values and pluralism that it survives such adversity. You don't have to like it or approve it to recognize that. Malaysia, Zulfikar Al-Unwar, known as Zunar, was last year charged under the Sedition Act for tweets criticizing the judiciary, facing a possible long prison sentence. He was detained twice in 2010 under this law for being for a couple of days each time. 5 of his cartoon books have been banned by the Malaysian government on the grounds that their content is detrimental to public order. And this is also a criticism that the Iranian government has been using against the women who are protesting the hijab itself. So for Zunar, the job of political cartoons everywhere in the world is to criticize the government of the day. My job is to fight through cartoons. He's added another phobia to the category of all phobias. We have a government that has a phobia of cartoons. We can hardly have imagined that a cartoonophobia, as the title of the book, could have been reached the depths that it did in Paris in 2015. Laughter can be a strong antidote to obscurantism and dogma. Laws and moral police have no place in regulating what we laugh at. So yeah, it was an interesting, what do you call it? A very interesting take. Um, but yeah, any final thoughts on this, Ginny?
Uh, More that the entire issue with Charlie Hebdo is very complex and includes a lot of dimensions. But generally, I am on the side of free speech.
Yeah. So yeah, this one thing we covered, the free speech. I wanted to move to the next topic, which was the hijab issue. That is, and again, I know we're two men talking about the hijab issue, but
Yeah, two men talking about how women
how
should
women
dress.
should dress. So
This is good.
this is
But
this.
generally, I'm actually for the right to dress in hijab as long as
Mhm.
it does not cover the face, because there is, there exist reasonable laws about, masks. So no litham or no niqab or no, burqa.
Yeah, so no burqa, but like a hijab. That is.
Yeah,
That you're
yeah, a
okay
normal
with.
hijab, as long as it is not, close to machinery or, health risks
Yeah.
in other ways.
Yeah, so which is an interesting um article that Nick sent me by Lisa M. Fornaria from the Indiana University Press. And it says here Islam's compatibility with the West, dress code restrictions, and the in the age of feminism. That is, so there's a bit of a clash with feminismist ideologies because the hijab and the burqa as well as the niqab or the jalabi themselves, by virtue, are not feminist things at all. Like they are inherently promoting male dominance, inherently speaking. Um, so I actually, you know what? Before this, should I share the hadith before this, or should I go over the article and then see the
You can
hadith?
go. You can go over the article because I think that we can all agree that the hijab exists in the Sunnah tradition.
Yeah, yeah. In the Sunnah as well as the Quran, chapter 24, verse 31, and chapter 33, verse 59 are the specific commandments of actually, let me just type it in the chat.
I
Quran
do think I remember that the
24,
Quran is more
31.
generalist too, just
Yeah,
being modest,
and
but that's
33, Quran. Let me just type it out so I can remember it, and we can look at the verses too later on. That is 33:59. All right, so let's go. So this one's a very interesting topic because I know we just moved from secularism, well, from freedom of speech to now the hijab issue, and France has become this hotbed of the issue that the hijab ban or the niqab ban, that is, in France. So, and it gets the most focus, and so we'll also go over countries which do have banned and there was even a burkini ban. There was a conflict in 2016. French beaches implement the so-called burkini ban. Though local governments contended the bans were based on concerns of secularism and hygiene, this argues that the policies are more easily explained by widespread Islamophobia, which personally I hate this term, but we'll let it slide here. It could be discrimination. Um, this note concludes Western countries' attempts to force choice feminism on a religion, or perhaps more appropriately, a culture they do not fully understand, which actually hinders progress towards gender equality, which muddles the issue. I wish there was a woman who joined us here, but you know what? We'll do our best. Uh, I'm willing to take that label. Muslim women's dress restrictions are among the most studied aspects of Sharia and the most cited justifications underlying the argument that Islam is fundamentally irreconcilable with Western values. This note will examine Islam's compatibility with Western culture through the lens of feminism and its interplay with traditional Islamic dress restrictions. Ultimately, it will argue that Islam is not inherently incompatible with Western values. However, Western society's generally reluctance to directly engage with Islam and the misinterpretations and Islamophobia, which I hate this term, resulting therefrom, has created a tension between Western feminism and Islam, as it assumes that Islam is innately promotes women's oppression. To be honest with you, it does. It does promote innately. So you don't need to sugarcoat it. Um, this paper will proceed in six parts. First, it will explore the verses, Islamic theory that are commonly cited, why some Muslim women wear the hijab. Second, it will briefly explore gender inequality in Muslim majority countries, in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan, and in which the West often views hijab as a symbol. Third, it will examine why Muslim women cover absent legislative mandates, including the question of whether wearing the hijab is a religious obligation or a personal choice. This section, and I actually remember Gada, another ex-Muslim, as well as what do you call it, Infidel Noodle, did a good section on this where they kind of debunked the myth that it was a choice, because it's a form of religious indoctrination. Indoctrination cannot necessarily be a choice in the
but
matter.
I would still, sure there is social pressure to wear it and
Hmm.
such, but I would still say that it is ultimately a choice. As long as there is someone that is threatening you to wear it,
Yeah.
physically.
And keep in mind, there are cases of domestic violence and threats of violence that make women, they're forced to wear the hijab. And
Yeah, but the problem isn't the hijab in that case. It's the threatening and the physical violence.
yeah, and the thing is also, like you said earlier, we have to go to the very heart of the issue. What does the religion say? It's a religious obligation. It's, at the end of the day, a religious obligation.
I
And
I wouldn't, just because it's a religious obligation doesn't make it acceptable, even with freedom of religion. There are acts that could be said to be included in religions that can't be allowed in a society with
Hmm.
the excuse of freedom of religion. So that isn't really the problem here. The problem is the religious act
Yeah.
only expressive, and or is it harmful outside of just the religious indoctrination that it is? I don't think a hijab in most cases is harmful outside of the own message spreading. And message spreading should be allowed.
Though I disagree with that, and respectfully so, I disagree because based on observation, based on the what do you call it, interviews, I think we did Fatima's interview as well, that in itself does it does harm the individual a lot. It harms the individual woman or girl, and it does set barriers to, like, it does act as a barrier to her individual life. I know I'm again from I know
Debatable,
a woman would
but
be able to
no,
better explain it, but the hijab causes, like, she pointed out issues such as, the hair issues, the fungus issues. On top of that, you also have issues such as, being forced to, when you decide to take it off, you just have, the entire community attacking you. There are very few privileged women, very few in power positions of privilege, who have the, privilege to be able to take it off. But this right is not granted to all. This
yeah, but
privilege doesn't exist in all.
but I would say
And
that that issue is less to do with the symbol itself and more how the community enforces that symbol, and that's an issue that doesn't go away just because you ban the symbol. It will still remain that they still have the power to enforce behavior elsewhere, and they will probably radicalize and be even worse when you. I mean, I think that the problem with Islam, we are so focused upon attacking the symbols of Islam, like the
mhm,
hijab, that we, deal with them, and they are kind of a red herring. They are not the main issue. The main issue are theological things about law, about orthopraxy, about other things that are a lot more important than just the hijab that is mostly symbolic.
I feel the hijab itself is a very important issue in itself, because of the fact that it's affecting 50% of the population of, you know like, all of the women of Islam, that is.
Yes, but
And both
again,
culturally, religiously, as well as, like, it has been a source of, problems, and there's a lot of victim playing as well from the pro hijabi community as well. And it's being painted as this symbol of freedom, when in reality it's a bit of an oxymoron, isn't it? It's
yeah, I agree that it isn't, you shouldn't be considered a symbol of freedom. But what
Mhm.
I'm saying is that, just because, a lot of women are, shunned because they wear this, or, this symbol or such, it's not any different from wearing any other symbol or any other political message on your clothing that signalize something that makes you shunned.
Right.
It
And,
should still be allowed.
like, what you're saying is you shouldn't be discriminated against for wearing it. That's what you're saying.
I mean, not exactly. What I'm saying is that the state shouldn't go in and ban the wearing of this.
Right. It's like you feel like the France should not ban the headdress in itself, or
No,
any nation.
except in if you are for work environments where it could be motivated, if
Hmm.
you handle heavy equipment, or if you get into health hazards due to being a nurse or something,
Yeah.
where have been such discussions. I'm not that into these discussions, so I don't know that much about it. But if there is a risk outside of just the symbolic value, then I think you can ban it in those
Hmm.
contexts.
Like in certain workplaces or work environments, that is,
Yes,
which are.
but you shouldn't ban it. Just you can't have an hijab. Turkey did it, but I don't think it's a good thing.
Mhm. And I feel like
I
Tunisia
think it just
also,
leads to radicalization, and it becomes a point that people will go around. Look at us, we are the victims. They can't even allow our
right,
religious symbols.
right. Okay, so it gives them fuel to, like, enforce it a lot
That's a
more.
secondary thing, but I
Hmm.
also think that the principle that they should have the right to still have symbols of their faith is
Yeah,
very important.
yeah. Now, um, back here, it says here, Sharia or Islamic law is primarily based on two textual sources, the Quran and the Sunnah. The Quran is the holy book of Islam, middle of the Prophet, direct word of Allah, as revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. Sunnah, which literally translates the way of life or rule of behavior, refers to Prophet Muhammad's actions and oral pronouncement. Similarly, Hadith contains the Prophet Muhammad's oral pronouncement as recounted by others and is subsumed under Sunnah. If there's a conflict between the Quran and Sunnah and reconciliation possible, the Quran's text prevails. Where the Quran and Sunnah are silent with respect to the particular legal issue, jurists supplement these sources with ijtihad, the process of interpreting Sharia's primary text. Only the ulama, religious scholars highly knowledgeable in Islamic law, may legitimately engage in ijtihad, and the scholars' distinct methods of interpretation ultimately created the five different schools of Islam. Though there are more schools, these are the five mainstream ones. Like, everybody follows under these five different schools. Finally, fiqh is Muslim jurisprudence, refers to science of ascertaining and applying Sharia principles. There are three main passages in the Quran which believers turn to justify dress restriction. The first relates to a woman's sexuality and reads, "Tell also the women of the faithful to lower their gaze, and they should guard their chastity, and they should not display any of their charms, khimar, publicly, save for what is decently observed, and they must draw their veils over their bosoms, and they should not display any of their charms." Now, yeah, I remember you said that the Quranic text itself is enough to be very vague. That is extremely vague.
Yeah,
Uh,
they should cover things that makes men intoxicated is more, I think, is a better translation, but yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like this article should have referred the actual text itself instead of, like, the women in Islam and took instead of quoting this, they should have actually put the actual text of the
Yeah,
Quran.
it's Quran 24:31
Yeah.
that they are trying to
So
translate here.
yeah. So it's like, why not put also Dude Abides, he asked this question, what about Turkey? It was banned until recently. The hijab, that is a statue, was
Yes, it was
right.
because you couldn't be in any government institutions. You couldn't be in school or the like with the hijab. It was banned.
Interesting.
And I do kind of see the point when it comes to, representatives of the government
Hmm.
having it banned because the government should be, secular in, not getting involved with religion. But I don't see it in imposing the dress code on the, students like they did in Turkey.
So, which is interesting because nobody highlighted this in Turkey about Turkey, and suddenly, like, when
It's a legacy of Ataturk, and
Mhm.
Erdogan revoked it. It was one of the main points when he made his first
Yeah,
campaign.
yeah,
And because they were quite excessive, it was also that since a lot of people actually did still wear the hijab, it was
yeah.
also used as a kind of tool of political pressure by the military regimes throughout the ages of Turkey, where they would say, "Oh, you have shown Islam is sympathizing with your, daughters having hijabs. Now to prison with you."
Yeah, so there was this issue with the with Turkey's
Yeah,
military.
but in this
Yeah.
case, this law wasn't nice either. Just because
Hmm.
Erdogan is a bastard doesn't mean that his secular predecessors were not too.
Yeah, yeah. Which kind of muddles the water a lot too.
A lot. This is why I also hate these simplifications. That everything is the fault of Islam. Sure, Islam has a lot of
Oh
rules that
yeah.
do cause a lot of issues, but the Middle East would be a chaotic zone even without it.
Yeah, yeah, it's quite toxic. It's very toxic, the the environment. Um This verse,
Mm,
yeah, this
toxic.
verse,
I would rather say that it's much more how it has always been.
yeah, this
It's
now,
just Europe that is kind of strange right now by being so
uh,
pacifist.
yeah, yeah, and it goes to show. The article continues. This verse goes on to say that women are permitted to display their charms to male family members, other women, male servants who no longer feel sexual desire. Male servants being the eunuchs, that is, and children who are too young to
Yes.
recognize a woman's nakedness. Classic Arabic dictionaries define the term khimar as a head covering, lending credence to the position that the verse declares devout Muslim women must cover. Moreover, when this verse was revealed, women wore head coverings tied to the back behind their necks, which left the neck and the upper chest exposed. Um, I don't know, because when you look at the hadith, it paints a very different picture. Thus, thus, this revelation was interpreted to mean such coverings were insufficient and increasingly modesty was required. Now, this is a very, I would say, a Pakistani interpretation of it, Pakistani woman interpretation of it, because it it also points out like the showing of the hair itself was seen as a sin. The showing of the hair itself. Um, This word is further expounding in some hadiths, such as the assertion that Aisha said, "May Allah have mercy upon the women of the first Muhajirin." And Allah revealed that they should draw their head coverings across their breasts. They tore, of 24:31, they tore from their mantles and veiled themselves with them. The second verse, which I actually point out, 33:59, which provides Prophet, tell your wives and daughters and women believers to make their outer garments jilbab. The term is jilbab, hang low over them so as to not be recognized and not insulted. This verse is similarly reinforced by hadith, one of which states when the Quranic verse was revealed, the women of Al Ansar tribe went out of their houses with a black cloth over their heads. And other hadith asserts that Umar bin Khattab said, God and I were in agreement of the verse, if only you would order your wives to veil themselves, for they're spoken to by wicked men of as well as those with honorable intentions. And so the verse, oh no, I feel like they missed out that one verse where Omar is actually creeping on Sauda. This article conveniently ignores that. Actually, let me show you that. Actually, let me just go through it before. Where is a host despite the it conveniently leaves out that story. Very conveniently leaves out the story. This article. The third and final, with the children of Adam, you have given your garments to cover your nakedness. It doesn't. It's not exactly as relevant though. These similarly reaffirm the female coverings. So it's like children of Adam is it's more not exactly relevant to this. So okay, Aisha narrated that the messenger used to pray among the morning prayer with him were believing who were shrouded in sheets when they went back into the houses and nobody knew them. Furthermore, the Prophet is reported to have said, when a woman reaches puberty, no part of her body should remain uncovered except her face and the hand up to the wrist joint. Again, which is very excessive, extremely excessive. The debate over whether these verses make hijab compulsory has particularly attention in Muslim majority countries. This debate often accompanies a surge in Islamic conservatism as Muslim majority states. For example, Egypt experienced a wave of Islamic conservatism in the early 2000s and attempted to expel uncertainty as to whether hijab is compulsory or merely advisory. In 2003, Grand Mufti of Egypt, Sheikh Ali Jumwa, Egypt Fatwa Authority, issued an Islamic legal ruling that hijab is obligatory for adult Muslim women. Jumwa further stated, unlike the cross sometimes worn by Christians or the skull cap, the hijab is not a symbol of Islam, but rather Islam orders female adults to wear hijab as obligatory religious clothing. It is part of every Muslim woman's religious practice. So this Grand Mufti here says that it is not the same as wearing a cross. Um, Despite these factors, many still argue that the Sharia's restrictions are not strictly required, but dictated by personal choice. These believers argue that the restrictions have become a central part of Muslim culture, and at most, traditional Islamic dress is a form of religious expression rather than a religious obligation. This is actually in contradiction to what scholars say, completely contradicting
Yeah,
what
but I mean,
scholars
I think
say.
that it's both, and even if it was just expression of religion, it
Hmm.
still does not, make it so that it becomes less of an issue to ban it.
Yeah, it's still an issue, that is. It still becomes a very big issue. In support of their argument, they show that what today is labeled as Islamic conservative dress actually has cultural roots dating back before the time of the Prophet, which I don't necessarily disagree with because
It's
this
true,
is
but it
this
does
is
not
from
still not change
oh
the
no,
fact that it's part of Islam.
yeah, yeah.
This just makes it all right. It has longer roots back even before Islam, but it is due to Islam partially why it still remains.
And Islam continues this practice. Also, I think I was going to refer to Assyrian, um, certain Assyrian teachings that there was the covering teaching in the Assyrian
Actually,
religion.
the dude with his hair is wide obsession with covering women's hair. It's not necessarily an Islamic thing, but an Abrahamic thing. Actually, it's even further than that. It's a thing
Really?
that has even existed in several cultures. The Romans and also the later Byzantines actually
Hmm.
had poorer women covering themselves.
Hmm.
We always see these, uncovered Roman women, but that's due to the fact that they are high status women that are protected by
Right.
noblemen because they have guards. Lower women had actually normally bore veils, and
But
some
they,
even like the vestigial virgins actually wore veils that covered their entire faces.
yeah, and though I do
So
agree, it's
it's
Abrahamic as
and
well. I do agree it's
it's
Abrahamic as
Abrahamic.
well. Yeah, and
And
I also
but I just saying that veils and such, and head coverings like that has been practiced in a lot of cultures.
it has a long, long history. I do agree because
Yeah,
from the Assyrian Empire, I would argue from the
yeah.
Assyrian Empire, and the history is extremely long,
It's
and
also a very practical thing when you are in a very desert-like environment because
yeah,
you want to be able to quickly cover your face by the veil. You can quickly draw it up to cover your face or the like if you're suddenly get into a storm and all the sand is coming.
yeah. So keep in mind, it would be useful. It would have been useful for both men and women. That is. Hence, I feel like the Arab headdress of men has also been influenced by the desert itself. But it hasn't become an obligation to wear it, like unlike the hijab, that is. Um, and Yeah, so in support of their argument, they show that what is Islamic, for example, in Assyria. Oh, they actually mentioned Assyria. That's interesting. Such dress indicated a woman's social rank. You are correct, as wearing clothing that comports with modern definitions of hijab reflected that a woman was married or a member of the elite. Peasants, servant girls, and prostitutes, however, did not cover. I think this was in the Assyrian times, that is, that if you were uncovered, you were a servant girl, you were even a slave too. So, scholars agree that whether a woman wore hijab during these historical times was motivated by culture and social status, not religious beliefs. But, Ginny, you said that even though it predates Islam, it still was alive and well today because of the religion.
Yeah, I think that Islam is one of the reasons why,
Hmm.
together with how Christianity also wants you to cover it in
Yeah.
a more limited manner. But and it head veils were actually pretty common even in the northern part of Europe. But that still think that these head coverings being practiced for such a long time has to do with Islam. I don't think it would have survived otherwise.
Yeah, yeah,
But
it's
now we are
good
talking
point.
contrafactual history, so this
Mhm.
can become very hard to say with
Yeah,
certainty.
absolutely. Because again, I would say probability wise, you can just say probability rather than certainty. Um, Further, men in societies also wore veils during this time and even today. And in some nomadic Middle Eastern communities, men covered their entire face except the eyes. Then they turned 25 as a cultural practice, which is interesting.
Oh, the
Similar.
Rifara.
Oh, is it the Khafara? 32 Subon Sanek,
Yeah.
which is interesting, a very interesting practice. Similarly, men and women in countries such as Qatar and the United Arab Emirates are culturally required to wear conservative dress similar to hijab. Finally, some Muslims claim that the traditional Islamic dress is not religiously mandated, interpret the Quran's passage to mean that hijab was simply intended to identify women as Muslims so as to protect them from harassment. As such, they argue that the first women to veil did so not to conceal, but because the coverings announced the religious status of the women, drawing attention to the fact that these women were Muslims and therefore were to be treated with respect. Uh, the, Under this reasoning, the traditional dress is not a religious requirement, but an optional social safeguard. But it also makes it a religious kind of like a symbol in a way. It makes it a symbol.
Yeah.
So, the author, I kind of agree and disagree with this author, but they're making some interesting points. Determining whether, and also I'm being nice, determining whether traditional Islamic dress is in fact Islamic or whether the dress is dictated by culture is important because the distinction is crucial to distinguishing between gender inequality resulting from the cultural practice and gender inequality originating within the religion. If the dress restrictions are formally rooted in the Middle Eastern culture rather than Islam, the coverings are a cultural choice rather than a religious practice, and thus any resulting gender inequality is associated with part rather than part of the religion.
I
Uh,
just have to say this that, just because the religion has adopted something into it doesn't make it automatically unreligious. It's still religious because,
mhm.
it got incorporated into the religion. This is
Yeah,
like saying that all the, previous Abrahamic tales, since they are obviously taken from before Islam, aren't part of the religion. They are.
yeah, and it is part and parcel of Islam. All,
I
uh,
mean, just yeah. Every religion takes things from previous cultures. That doesn't make it unreligious
mhm.
or not part of the religion when it happens. It's
Yeah,
ugh.
yeah. It's there's this misunderstanding of saying that, oh, because it adopted it from this, it's not part of it. We're not supposed to know. It's still part of the religion. So I do agree with you on that. If the Now this author continues, if the coverings are religiously mandated, however, any resulting inequality would arguably be indistinguishable from religious practice. Therefore, the roots of the dress restrictions are important to determine whether the religion is inherently imbalanced or if the suggested gender inequality can more fairly be attributed to another source. So, Um, now, here they talk about mandated and hijab and gender inequality in Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia. Do they talk about Iran? Because I know that Iran has the protests going on against, with Mahsa Amini being beaten to death by the, what do you call it, the morality police. Though I know there's the news that they are planning to abolish the morality police, so, which is a kind of good news. But it's just to be careful. This could even be temporary too. All right, so let's see Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia. Some women cover because they're legally obligated to do so. And in this legal obligation, it's regardless of your religion, you have to wear this, regardless of religion. So in this situation, some women, because however, in Muslim majority countries, legislation requiring women to wear hijab is rare. The 49 Muslim majority countries, Iran and Saudi Arabia, are the only two recognized states that legally force women to cover, which is true. There are only two states But keep in mind, they are literally they are using not using, but like they are following Islamic practices to the T. Of like Iran is following the Sharia of uh, the Jafar Sharia to the T, and Saudi Arabia is basically following the Hanbali teachings to the T. The burqa was also previously obligatory in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. Interestingly, the Islamic State initially required women in its territories to wear niqabs or burqas, but later banned the burqa in some areas on account of security concerns after a veiled woman used a pistol to kill two Islamic State members at a checkpoint in Sharqat, Iraq. Yeah, well, she was practical. I'm not gonna lie, she's very practical. I admire this woman. Because both Taliban controlled Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia have been ruled by harsh interpretations of Sharia, it's not just harsh interpretations, this is literally Sharia. These countries, among others, are often cited as an example of Sharia practice in practice. Western audiences are more mortified by the country's subpar histories with human rights, particularly women's rights, which Western audiences attribute to the government's implementation of Sharia. When criticizing gender inequality and women's oppression in the Middle East, detractors first look to Taliban controlled Afghanistan, an easy target. But I don't find Afghanistan controlled Taliban an easy target. Rather, I found Iran as a rather easier target. Afghanistan was once viewed as a moderate state, with gender equality explicitly protected by the country's 1964 constitution. In May of 1992, the Taliban founded the Islamic State of Afghanistan, and consequently, many Afghanis lost important freedoms. Ordinances enacted by Taliban unforgivably regulated women's behavior and required women to wear the burqa because, as one Taliban official said, the face of woman is a source of corruption for men who are not related to them. See, this is the kind of ridiculous reasoning as to why, we don't like this headdress, the burqa or the hijab. This is the reason. The burqa not only completely conceals the woman, but also restricts their movements. As one Anglo-Afghan journalist reported, the burqa's veil is so thick that the wearer finds it difficult to breathe. Moreover, the small mesh panel included in the permit site so thoroughly limits vision that even crossing the street safely can be difficult. Yeah. Mandating that women wear the burqa could also impose financial burdens, as the garment costs an average Afghani 2 months. Jesus, salary, 2 months salary. Wow. I did not know this burqa was that expensive. Women deemed to have violated the Taliban's mandates on propriety were savagely punished, even for minor infractions. For example, one woman was whipped by Taliban guards because her burqa slipped as she walked her children down the street. The image of a woman in a burqa soon came to represent the comprehensive gender inequality and brutality plagued Taliban control of Afghanistan. Before the Taliban took control of Kabul, schools for co-educational women accounted for 70% of all teachers. Though gender discrimination undoubtedly exists during this earlier time, women were trained to be professionals and accounted for about 50% of civil servants and 40% of medical doctors. Despite the Taliban officials' admission that the Quran provides for education for everyone, the Taliban implemented region-specific rules forbidding girls over the age of 8 from attending schools to avoid corruption. Only schools licensed by the Taliban were permitted, and even some schools were closed. Further, although hundreds of thousands of women were widowed by 2 decades of war, women were not permitted to work, with the exception for a few positions as health workers and surveyors with international organizations. Taliban legislation also held that a woman must not leave her house without her husband's permission, which is in Islam, by the way, or without a male escort. Any ambiguity regarding the Taliban's intentions to keep a woman in the home was eviscerated in January 1996, when, in response to complaints about an incident in which a Taliban official hit a woman with a car, the local government commented, "It is a good lesson to other women not to go outside their houses. Women in their houses or in their grave." Damn. Damn, that's fucking cold. That's fucking cold right there. When in public, women were required to walk quietly and refrain from laughing or talking loudly, and were forbidden to look at strangers. Under Taliban rule, Afghani women were denied freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, and religion, as well as rights to health services, employment, and rights to partake in government and be free from torture. Saudi Arabia has similarly withdrawn widespread criticism for its objectionable gender practices. Saudi Arabia it requires all women to wear hijab when in public and has a religious police force, an al mutawayin, that strictly enforces the law by administering beatings to women who reveal their faces, hair, or bodies in public or who otherwise commit infractions of moral codes relating to dress or behavior. The mandate's rigidity and relentlessness was best illustrated in 2002 when Molmutatin refused to allow 15 girls to escape the burning dormitory because they were not properly veiled. Damn, I actually did not know of this incident. The girls consequently died in the fire.
Yeah, because
Wow.
we just follow the rules, just like they did in China now recently with the burning building and the COVID restrictions.
What the so what
Yes,
did
they did it in China too.
really? Like so
Yes,
wow.
it's one of the reasons why it caused such massive protests because they sent out that it was because of one of the regional people that had to enforce this, declare that, oh no, don't let people out when the buildings are burning if they are COVID quarantined.
Oh man, no wonder why the protests are happening. No fucking wonder. Because I was like, what is up with the protests? And it's because of this is because of shit like this.
Because people take their job. I mean, the issue I think here is that you get people that are, you know, you always get these people that are very square like in their thinking. They get
Yeah.
something and they will be hyper literalist in in applying it.
Yeah. And this is where like hyper literalism, what do you call it? It's just so weird. Um Wait, so Dude Abide said, well, when I went to quad biking in Egypt, I had to wear that headdress. Sand just gets everywhere. Hair, eyes, ever. Really? This is interesting. Uh, so I actually, this is definitely interesting. So, but yeah, like this is very hyper literalism plus like, what the fuck did I just read? Like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? Like, there's a fire going on. But anyway, to many Westerners, the dress requirements have come to symbolically represent other mandates creating gender inequality in Saudi Arabia. One such policy requires every Saudi woman to have a male guardian who has the power to make a range of critical decisions on her behalf. Pursuant to the system, adult women must obtain their guardian's permission to travel, marry, or exit prison. And women may also be required to provide proof of their guardian's consent before working or being granted access to healthcare. Absent assistance, yeah, this is going to be open to abuse. Absent assistance from their guardian or another male relative, women regularly encounter barriers conducting in a range of transactions from renting an apartment to filing legal claims. Additionally, Saudi Arabia withholds privilege from men that many Westerners consider to be basic rights. For example, the country does not require education or even basic literacy for women, and because schooling is not compulsory, many fathers will not allow their daughters to attend. Women who do attend school face additional obstacles in education as women and men are not permitted to attend class or use libraries together. In the case of King Saud's, the university's library, women are only allowed to use for one morning per week. Jesus. Despite these odds, Saudi women have made incredible strides in regard to obtaining education, though this progress is largely unknown or at least unacknowledgeable by the West. I mean, it's mainly due to the fact that Saudi women, it's their grit. That is, Saudi Arabia has also received international criticism for its long-standing policies prohibiting women from driving. Indeed, in April, a Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed stated the country was not ready for women to drive. He went on to say, however, that this topic is dictated by cultural and not Islamic norms. Um, because like because technically a woman can ride a camel, right? In
Yes.
the Islamic. So this one it felt more, even though it is like there might be some fatwas about it. I don't know about the fatwas about driving.
But the problem is that a lot of religious thick interpretations also include earth or local traditions into their
Hmm.
statements, which means that the borders between local traditions and Islam are usually a lot blurred a lot.
And a lot more. There's a lot of overlap too.
Yeah, they shouldn't technically, since the Hanbalis shouldn't consider this
Yeah,
historically, but they do it anyway.
yeah.
Despite, I mean, it, it's pretty funny because even no, I will not.
Ibn who?
Let's continue.
Okay, okay, okay.
Or I will go into the entire handball school and how the
Yeah,
handball school actually is a lot more complex than what usually people think.
yeah. And yeah, it gets very the history gets very complicated for the Hanbalis, that is.
And then you get into the Madkhali, Salafis, and
Yeah,
all of these other things.
yeah, which in itself can be a separate video and topic on its own.
Yeah.
I won't be able to finish the article for today. I can continue it next time, but let's just see how much we can cover because I know we're reaching the 2 hour mark in 4 or 5 minutes. Um, in societies where, how long has it been? Okay, so we have 4 minutes. So yeah, in societies where hijab is not legally mandated, there's little that unites Muslim women who opt to cover. Studies show that women who cover up come from various familial and societal situations. Some come from families where their mothers choose not to cover but are receptive to arguments in favor of covering. But some come from families that are strongly opposed to hijab, which is actually true. And some come from families where most women, if not all, wear the headscarf. So, there are families I recall in Pakistan that are actually very opposed to hijab, as well in Pakistan. So the issue it gets very interesting and this is places where it's not legally mandated. Further, a woman who covers in some situations may not cover all in all situations and may abandon hijab during one period of her life only to later resume the practice. And yeah, this is true. Behavioral wise, this is very true based on the studies. This fluidity, most prevalent amongst Muslim women in the West, is largely because women's decision to cover are motivated by multiple factors that may shift through their lives.
I mean, it's also part of a cultural fashion statement
Mhm.
sometimes. I mean, haven't you seen or the now I'm going to sound like these, somewhat sleazy Islamist guys, but haven't haven't you seen all of these hijabis that wear the hijab but have these very form-fitting clothing that
Right?
leaves almost
I
nothing
know.
to the imagination?
Yeah, I think there's some bloggers too that actually have some TikTok videos. I've seen some reels with like women with the hijab, but they're very, very big fashionistas. Power to them. All power to them. I'm not going to complain about it. All power to them. But at the same time, I'm thinking, doesn't that defeat the purpose of the hijab in the first place?
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah,
that's what's my entire point.
yeah, it's so weird. It is so weird, but honestly, honestly, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it either. So I just get very confused. Um, Indeed, one American Muslim explained her decision to move it was just as much about her evolving femininity in American, and it was about Muslim culture. Yeah, most women state that their decision to cover is based, at least in part, on belief, piety, and worship of God through the religious observance of modesty. So basically, the belief system itself is the core issue. Like they cover because of the belief, that is. It's because it's mandated, it's because of the religion itself. So these arguments generally parallel arguments that uncovering is mandated in Sharia and is an important piece of Islamic culture. In addition to the vast diversity within the faith as to whether covering is necessary, there's no consensus as to the extent of which a woman should cover. I partially agree and disagree with this. because there is consensus of the hair. There's general consensus of the hair. Of the face, though, it's debatable. There are many wide range coverings available, ranging from a headscarf that only covers the hair to the neck burqa that covers the entire, including the face. Therefore, many Western Muslim women operating on the belief that the covering is not required argue that there is no direct correlation between a Muslim woman's decision or to the extent which she covers and her dedication to it. It's more to do with you know there is a correlation.
I just thought about a thing,
Yeah,
a very meta thing with regards to this. We have now spent over almost an hour just discussing a piece of cloth.
I know, right? Literally, we spent an hour, technically 56 minutes discussing a piece of cloth. Um, sounds ridiculous, but it is a religious. It's a statement, right?
Yeah.
It's it in itself is a statement. I was not able to cover if whether France was Islamophobic, and yeah, I did want to actually. You know what? Let's just quickly cover France's mandate. That is France's ban on the covering. So I wanted to quickly cover that. We can kind of extend. We can do a part two of this. So we can just label this part one. We can do a part two of
Yeah,
this.
yeah. Label this part one, and then we will in the next episode discuss.
Next episode we can discuss because
That also gives me a little bit of time to look into it because
because the France issue, I did want to do a France issue again, part two. That is because this has been a widely hot topic as
the
of late.
next one isn't going to be. Are you going to have next on Christmas? Because Sweden in Sweden we have the celebration on the 24th.
Oh wow. Okay, the next episode. Ooh, I'm thinking of either doing a Christmas special that day. I'm thinking of doing a Christmas special because
Right.
Drastic Measures asked and something about like Islamic Jesus, because I know there's the tradition of us doing Jesus on that day too. But we can actually cover Jesus half an hour we can dedicate to this, and we can dedicate
because
to various
I am just saying that day I will not be available.
Okay. I mean, we might not. I'll discuss with Nick to see if we do next week or the day before on the Friday, maybe on the 23rd. But we'll see. If it we'll announce it on Discord that when we'll do the episode. No, all right. You're welcome to sing carols. Okay, I'll give you that pass. You can sing some carols. You gave me a pass for saying the word soccer, so I'll give you the pass to sing Christmas carols. So yeah, it would be an interesting. We'll see if we can do either the Friday or the Sunday, because maybe there might be something on our end too. Either Nick or myself might be occupied as well, because people do dinners on Christmas Eve, right? So well, we'll definitely see. We'll announce it on Discord for sure. And yeah, Drastic, yeah, I'll be releasing a song on my channel. This would be, and I would love to see your song on the channel. So Culture Ginny, it's not Islamophobia. Oh, definitely. But yeah, Culture Ginny. I know we couldn't cover. Um, we covered a lot, but I feel like we could cover more. But man, the time difference, the time restriction is just 2 hours. I
Yeah.
think didn't want to tire the audience too much, but I'll just label this, edit this episode and labeled it as part one then.
Yeah, and then we will be back for part two.
Yeah, we'll do a part two. So next time we'll do a part two on this. Maybe not necessarily the next episode, but the episode after, so that we can discuss France's um, hijab issue. That is. So yeah, hang on. Let me just go back. All right. So thank you so much, Ginny, for joining me today. Thank you so much, people in the audience. Any final words or any closing statements, Ginny, for overall for today's various topics, that is, because we covered a lot.
Well, on blasphemy, I say you have the free. I think you should have the free speech to be blasphemous or be insulting in other ways too,
Yeah,
in any direction. As
yeah,
long as it's not called for direct criminal action, it's fine.
yeah.
Secondly,
Mhm.
it's much ado about a piece of clothing.
Yeah, yeah. And a piece of clothing holds so much power. Just imagine that an entire country is in flux over a piece of clothing. Imagine that. Right now, Iran's protest. Yeah, we'll even cover Iran's protests in part two of this. Both France's ban and Iran, and how like this issue is like falsely equated, that is, because it's oversimplified. Like you said, it's heavily oversimplified. I personally find. But thank you so much, guys, for joining us. Thank you, Ginny, as always. Thank you so much again.
It's always fun to just be here.
Yeah, thank you for not leaving me alone here on my own.
No issues.
All right.
I'm sorry that I couldn't join you last time with Nadir Ahmed, but
No problem.
I was very ill.
No problem. We had an interesting episode, and Faze was able to be an excellent. Shout out to Faze King for being a good moderator, a very neutral moderator. So very big shout out to him. And once again, happy birthday, Nick. All right, take care, everyone.
Take care.
And well, I might join you on Discord if you like. So I'll probably join you in Discord in a bit.
Yeah.
All right, see you there.
See you there.